My name is Landon Bell, and I like to party.
Hello, Landon. How are you doing today?
I'm good. How about you, Ben?
Pretty decent, aside from being a little sick. So I'm not going to be at maximum energy, but I will try my best. We are here today to broadly have a conversation about meta ethics, and I will let Landon kick this off and kind of start explaining the sheet here.
Hey, I'm Landon. I'm a friend of Ben's. I Wow, it'd be really prideful to call myself a philosopher. I'm a philosopher because I have an undergrad in philosophy, and then I did a year of graduate school in philosophy. Um, Stopped and kind of went a different path, but I still enjoy philosophy a lot. Um, so me and Ben always get into these kinds of discussions, and so we thought these kinds of things would be interesting to formalize and introduce to his audience. We're mainly going to be in the realm of meta ethics, but we'll kind of need to build up some groundwork to get there. Meta ethics as a subject is kind of one of the more advanced branches that most people, even getting a philosophy degree, wouldn't get into until the later years of their degree or even until their master's. But to put it in layman's terms, ethics by itself would just be the branch of philosophy that tries to talk about the different systems that the world has come up with to explain what is good and what is bad. Meta ethics goes in and says, okay, but what is the nature of good? What is the nature of bad? What quality of these actions makes it so it's bad, or makes it so it's good? But we're going to start with, I guess, some real basic philosophy kind of stuff here at the beginning. One of the things that philosophy gets into is we start talking about what we believe and the way that we think the world is. Um, Philosophy tends to think of any of these statements as claims. So if you're looking along with what I'm talking about, we're right here on path one, number one. What is a claim? Claim is just any statement that is made about a subject. That subject could be football, basketball, a sports team, a religion, so on and so forth. Um, a claim, we always talk about it as coming from a single source. At the smallest level, that could be from one person. But, we tend to also talk about an organization as making a claim or a religious group as making a claim. But it's just important to realize that claims are kind of reducible to coming from one source. So I have some examples of claims here. We have, I like ice cream. That's a claim. God is good. That's a claim. 2 plus 2 equals 4. That's a claim. You might be thinking, there's some that are very straightforward. There's some that seem like an everyday occurrence. And then there's some ones that might be deemed, controversial. But these all still fall under as a claim. We have our objective claims, which it can be any statement that can be proven true or false. So an objective claim can be wrong. For example, the example I gave was 2 plus 2 equals 4. We would consider that an objective claim. But if I modified that and I said 2 plus 2 equals 3, that claim is still an objective claim, because I'm stating something that is a fact about the world, and since it can be verified as true or false, that's what makes it objective. Now, for another good example of this, the most controversial example of a claim that I gave earlier, God is good, we could still arguably say that that is an objective claim, even if you disagree with the existence of that or not. More the argument would be about how that can not be proven. But it's still claiming something about the world, so we say it's subjective. Then we have subjective claims, which is, relatively self-explanatory. It's anything that's not a factual matter, and usually we'd say it's more akin to a statement of preference, like the example I gave earlier of I like ice cream. Again, some people would claim that the claims like God is good would fall under subjective, but it's still important to kind of broadly categorize these things. Now, to get more into, I guess, the more nitty-gritty of how we can divide claims, most people in everyday terms already kind of talk about objective facts versus subjective facts. But philosophy likes to go further and differentiate. So we have these two types. We have the descriptive claims and we have normative claims. A descriptive claim is a statement of facts or laws, or it's just stating how things are. So I could say 2 million people saw the new Marvel movie. That is a statement of a fact. It also states how things currently are in the world. I could also say the chair is made of maple or my shirt is red. Those are all things. They are not describing preference. They're describing like an aspect of something. Then we have normative claims, which is how things ought to be or how they ought not to be. This discussion about ought is usually where people start thinking of discussion about morality. Normativity is something that comes up a lot in philosophy, and there's thousands of paper written on even what normativity is, but we're going to talk about it very generally, or what the general consensus is. So an example of a normative claim is you should love your neighbor. Another normative claim is you should invest in a new index fund. All these things are stating how someone should act or how they should not act. And to be fair, it also doesn't necessarily need to be an action, but as long as it meets the criteria of stating how things ought or ought not. You can say those things about non-acting agents. It doesn't have to be how people act. Like, for example, you could say that climate change should not be happening. If you're stating that more as a in that sense, you're stating the world has a specific way that it should be, and climate change is not a part of that. It's something that was introduced later, so to speak. Now, me and Ben have had a lot of talks about ethics, and so part of all this buildup is to get into lay the groundwork for us talking more about our different kind of approaches of understanding our morality. And due to that, basically the focus that's going to come into play for most of our discussion is going to be normative claims. But the reason I wanted to introduce these other things is I want us to be able to point out when we are making maybe a subjective one and when we are making a descriptive one. Because if we're doing that, then we've kind of fallen outside of the realm that our discussion should be going. But to help with that, I want to divide normative claims into two different cases. We have moral normative claims and prudential normative claims. Now, you might be thinking, why is one of the subsections moral when you said normativity is the realm of morality? This, again, it's probably not the best naming convention that they came up with, but this is to differentiate how many people want to break down morality. This divide could best, like, broadly be spoken of, like, how do the people speak about morality that don't hold to a religion or a god, and then how people that hold to a god talk about morality. Now, there can be crossover between those two different things, but broadly speaking, they would stick in one camp more than the other. To help illustrate this, let me tell you what I mean. So, for a moral normative claim, that would be something like my example one: you should love your neighbor. A prudential normative claim would be something like example 2. You should invest in the new index fund. Both of them are stating what you ought to do. But basically the difference is the root word for prudential is also where we get the word for prudence. So prudential normative claims, the example, you should invest in new index fund, is more about what is wise for you to do. So a prudential normative claim is more reducible to only one person. It's not as wide of a net. While when we talk about moral claims, we understand that as everyone, all humans should love their neighbor, or all humans should not kill. So the difference is kind of in scope there. And you'll see how this kind of comes up later when we get into the kind of difference between discussions of morality coming from the religious perspective against the, I guess, non-religious or scientific perspective. Now, it's important to point out that I just realized, Ben, I'm probably rushing along and being like a robot. Is there anything that I might have skipped over or that you think I could use some rephrasing?
No, we're good so far, I think. I was just going to point out something that you already covered it back whenever you had put that God is good as an objective claim, but that you were saying that's kind of part of the debate is trying to figure out, is that objective or a subjective claim? Because to state that that's objective, you're already kind of presupposing that morality is objective, so you can make objective value claims in the first place. But
again, it gets hard where it's like a lot of the debate in ethics is ultimately over what can be objectively proven. And let me circle back because I might be getting ahead of myself if I start going into that more. But I wanted to point out that anytime you start talking about normative claims, whether that be prudential or moral, we are in the realm of philosophy that people would call ethics or morality. The other thing to point out is that no matter if the claim is descriptive or normative, both types can be considered subjective or objective. In fact, it is that distinction that takes up a huge portion of the discussion. Where me and Ben have gotten in our previous discussions of morality basically reduces to this problem. As, again, I don't want to put words in your mouth, Ben, but usually what it comes down to is Ben has said that when people are claiming moral facts, they are actually just expressing what they prefer. While I would say they're expressing something that could be proven true or false. So this would be the difference between, I think when someone says you should love your neighbor, I think that is a objective claim. Whether or not that's true or false is up for debate. For Ben, a lot of times he would say that isn't an objective claim, that's just purely subjective. The person is saying they would prefer if everyone loved their neighbor. So this is where we get into there's various jumping off points when talking about morality. And this is the furthest down the line, so to speak, that one could jump off, where you would just say all claims are inevitably claims about preference and therefore are subjective. Now, some people, even if they're not religious, might not feel comfortable with that because, for example, in terms of language, even those that hold the belief that all language is inevitably talking about preference, there's still a weird thing that happens built into all languages where we seem to be presenting things in a different manner that is more objective, even when you start looking at grammatical structure. So one of the arguments or pushback in claiming that all moral facts or all statements are preferential is that then you need to explain why this system that we've come up with leads to these false conclusions. That system meaning our natural language and how that's developed. Then you also have to begin arguing about, well, should we begin to maybe dismantle or change the system to better fit the reality? Which that would mean upending a lot of our grammatical and language norms. Some people don't feel comfortable with that, but then are also not comfortable with jumping fully on maybe the religious or God side of things. That's where you get into claiming that there is objective moral facts, but they fall more under the category of prudential normal claims instead of moral normal claims. So what they would say is that given a certain position, let's say you are you're high up in a certain business and you deal with the business's finance. Your business posts a new compensation package where you could invest some of your retirement money into this new account and they're going to match you 100%. Given you being in that job with that opportunity and your values as wanting to have a better future for your retirement, then they would say morally you should invest in that new fund. So that's the difference there between prudential and moral. Prudential says, given these set circumstances, there is a thing you ought to do, but it's only categorized to the person that's in that specific circumstance. It's not extrapolated to all of mankind. But that position allows you to still claim that there is normativity. It also allows you to still claim that there is some consistency with our language and the way that we speak about morality, but you also can reject the more sweeping generalizations maybe that they might see religion doing. And to be honest, the even more complex thing is that religion can still have room for prudential reality. It's actually more when you're not in the religious group that you have no room for moral normative claims and just prudential. That's a lot all at once, so I'm going to stop.
Are you saying that without religion, you can't make moral normative claims, all of your ought claims become prudential, but then we just kind of apply those broadly to a lot of humans, or like, what would you say?
So again, I'm making kind of generalizations here. There have been attempts in recent years to try to maintain normativity or normative claims and have both types, being moral normative claims and prudential normative claims. But there's not as much of the philosophical community has really said that those are compelling, if that makes sense. There's still kind of early writings and discussions. The more developed area of non-religious or atheistic or scientific approach to philosophy in the meta-ethical field would either fall into the camp of saying there are normative claims, but they're prudential, or they would take the position that you have and just outright say there is no such thing as normative claims. We just are saying our preferences in a way that seems like an objective claim.
Well, I mean, I would say that I still make normative claims, but I just don't consider them objective. Like, I would still say that, like, I think that people ought to not kill, not steal, not rape, and it's my preference that all people in the world do that, and I would tell people to not do that. I would pass policy to ban that kind of stuff, you know? So, I mean, I would still consider that me making a normative a moral normative claim, but that's just me stating a preference. And then, you know, my hope would be at that point that if enough people agreed with me, we could live in this kind of like inter-objective reality where we agree on the social contract and live by it, you know?
So this comes down. This is one of those like technical things for language. By the way, I don't know if is me scrolling up also scrolling up for your side of the Google Doc.
No, but I'm just kind of following wherever your cursor is. I'm trying to follow along
Okay.
with what you're saying
Um.
because currently you're still just on the A section of the
Oh, my bad.
right.
I like went down. So if you look at a uh objective versus subjective claim, uh, or wait.
Or no, this whole time I've kind of had the screen on the two subtypes of normative claim section,
Okay.
right before part three.
So I guess I should clarify whenever I say that certain positions would get rid of normative claims, it's not that normative claims can't be made in that position. It's just that in that position, a normative claim isn't objective. It can't be proven true or false. So therefore, it basically just becomes um, descriptive. It just falls back into a subjective claim.
But why would
So
that be descriptive? Like, isn't that still a prescription that I'm making? As I'm saying, you ought not kill.
I'm sorry. I don't mean I was using descriptive in the non like technical way that I have written here.
Oh, okay.
Um, I realize that's probably confusing. I guess what I should say is that it, we can call a claim like a moral claim that you make from your position. We can say that it's a normative claim, but we're kind of just that term doesn't mean that much if all it does is mean stating a preference, because we already have a term that is talking about our preferences, and that would be subjective claims.
Um, I guess
They become equal, if that makes sense. They become you can just switch them out.
I would just, I mean, I look at it differently to where there's like a matrix of descriptive and prescriptive or normative, and then objective and subjective. It's like a little Punnett square, right? And like I look at it like I can still make a normative claim. It's just my subjective opinion. I don't think that. I mean, if that's if that's kind of what the consensus is in philosophy, then that's okay. But I've always looked at it like you can still make a prescription, like a prescriptive statement that is just your opinion based on your subjective values. I mean, because I mean, yes, it is a descriptive fact that I'm stating a preference, but then when I state that preference, I tell people you ought not do that. Then I'm making a prescriptive statement, right?
Okay, yeah, I get what you're going for. Let
Yeah.
me
And these might just be, I mean, quibbles over vocabulary or something, but I've just
well,
always divided it up into descriptive and prescriptive. Um,
it is quibbles over vocabulary, but that's exactly what you get into at this point of philosophy. Um, so just using like a broad definition for normativity, and this is literally like me pulling up the one from Google, basically, is that normativity is the phenomenon in human societies of designating some actions or outcomes as good, desirable, or permissible, and others as bad, undesirable, or impermissible. A norm in this sense means a standard for evaluating or making judgments about behavior or outcomes. So, yes, you can still say that you're making a normative claim. The difference really comes into that second half, which is saying when you're making a normative claim, the norm or standard can only be evaluated by the person stating the claim.
right.
But 90% of the time that we talk about philosophy and morality, that's not the way that we're talking about normativity. We're talking about in a sense that there's a standard that we can hold the person's belief to and say that it's true or false. So it's not that it's wrong to say that it's not wrong to hold normativity with that definition, but it does do something strange when you try to take that definition and go back and retroactively read the discourse on philosophy about ethics, because that wasn't the definition that most people for the majority of the philosophical tradition had about normativity.
This might
Does that
be
make sense?
kind of, but I think this might be a good point to maybe have our first jumping off thing, because I disagree with that framing pretty strongly, just because it sounds like what you're describing is objectivity, because you're saying that like they've used the word normative to describe things against which there is some standard that you can say if that claim is true or false, but that's just objectivity, right? Normativity is saying you ought to do this, or like you ought to, so it's like is versus ought claims, and then is versus ought claims, and then there's subjective and objective claims. So I feel like, I just reject that framing. I feel like you can still make a normative claim that there doesn't need to be any objective standard by which you can say that a normative claim is true or false, because that's what objectivity is meant to measure, right? Not normativity.
Yes. So I guess what I'm saying is that, are you comfortable with saying that no claims are objective?
I would be comfortable with saying that no value claims are objective, yes. But I think that scientific claims, kind of like we touched on earlier, I think that claims about physical reality get at objectivity. But I guess I would say that every claim is subjective, because it's being filtered through our subjective understanding of reality. It's just that certain claims try to get at something outside of us that is objective, and then which I would consider those claims to be claims about reality, like factual claims, descriptive claims. But then I would say that prescriptive claims they live and die in our heads, and they only describe preferences. They don't get at anything in reality.
So I guess it's important to point out here that, not to say that there isn't someone who's written some paper that doesn't fit what I'm about to say, but I would say that 99% of people in the philosophical field would agree that there is a layer of subjectivity which all of our beliefs and thoughts and perceptions and statements are filtered through.
Right.
But that subjectivity and that filtering does not change the nature of the claim that we're stating about whether it's objective or subjective.
Well,
because
right.
so the push here is that in the philosophy of language, the way that we evaluate claims usually is broken down into, can we say that the claim is true or false? And when you take out normativity in the sense of our ought claims, like if you say that ought claims equal preference claims, then that can have some weird effects when we also start talking about mathematics and other forms of sciences that we tend to hold as being more objective. Because, like, let me phrase it this way: 2 + 2 ought to equal 4, right? And we say that 2 + 2 = 4 is an objective fact about the universe, even if there's this layer of subjectivity that could lead us to get it wrong. Now, but when we apply that ought to humans, and then we say that, oh, that ought is just saying preference, then now we have to explain that there must be some grammatical or syntactic difference between the statement of we ought to love our neighbor with 2 + 2 ought to equal 4.
Right, and I would say there is a syntactical difference between those two things, because one thing is that we are stating a preference that we want the world to be like from like a perspective of like morality and of values and of like an interpersonal kind of context. But then whenever we say things like, well, 2 + 2 ought to equal 4, like the context in which we would say ought in that statement would be like, we know that 2 + 2 = 4 as a descriptive objective fact. And then if we ever if somebody like ever tried to say that like we put two things with two things together and they turned into five things suddenly, we would say, oh, well, like that's odd. Like this should have equaled five, or like it ought to have equaled five. But like that's a different context of the word ought, because that's getting at a description of reality that we know to be true. If we expect reality to be consistent with the previous ways that it has been, and we assume that it will continue to operate like it always has, and if it doesn't do it, then we think, oh, well, that ought to have done that to fit the pattern, but that's not a moral claim. That's not a, you know.
So this is where it gets, I guess, kind of interesting, and it depends on the religion, but I think just due to our upbringing, we're a lot more used to like the kind of fundamentalist or Protestant Christian thing. So I'm going to talk about it from those terms. While morality does talk about how we ought to act, something that you said there was that, you know, there's this system of math, right? That we've decided that 2 + 2 = 4. And so us saying it's true or false is us, the 2 + 2 = 5, is us kind of comparing this claim to this system that we've already established. But you can also think of morality in that same way. But the set that you're comparing the ought to is how the world used to be, or how the world was. Usually in the Christian tradition, it'd be like before the fall, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
And so the oughts, while they are like how people should act, it's also an attempt to get things to better match up to the system of before.
Yeah, to fit the world into kind of the mold that we know it has always fit into. Because we like,
Yeah.
because we like to have consistency. So,
And
yeah, right.
yeah, and I only bring that up to point out that like it is easy to kind of reduce moral claims to just the preference in the moment, but there is, I think the people that hold those beliefs have something that goes even a bit further than that really encapsulates, if that makes sense.
Maybe so. Yeah, I guess I just don't agree with that framework of defining normativity in the way that you're defining it, or that, you know, you're saying that I guess most of the field of philosophy tends to define it. Maybe it's time to rewrite the field of philosophy. I don't know.
Well,
I've always heard it described in the way that I'm talking about it with like anybody that I've watched, but like maybe I just watch like normie people on YouTube. But just kind of my entire life, this is kind of how it was explained to me through, I mean, watching anybody from any of like the YouTube philosophy people or Sam Harris or whoever. And so, and I feel like it makes sense. Like it's a framework that it's like a thing can be objective, so it's attitude independent, it can be true or false, or it's subjective, which is just stating a preference. And then you can either state how things are or how you want them to be. And I feel like that creates a little 2x2 matrix, and a claim can be one and this or this and that and that and that, you know. And I feel like that's, but you're saying that a statement cannot be normative and subjective. Is that?
No, what I'm stating is that like your position would be one where there are normative claims, but they're all subjective.
Yes.
If they're all subjective, then you don't have both types of normative claims. You don't have moral normative claims, as I've called them. You would just have prudential ones.
Why can't a moral normative claim be subjective? Like why can't I state my opinion of morality? Like I believe that people ought not kill, and so that is because I think that murder is wrong. And so if I state you shouldn't kill people, I'm making a normative claim. I'm saying an ought statement, right? I'm making a prescription that is talking about the subject of morality, and it is my subjective opinion that is what people should do. That feels like that fits really neatly to me.
So the difference in the terms there is just about how you can or cannot verify it as true or false.
Right, but that's what objectivity is meant to measure, right? Like, isn't that the whole point of the objective subjective dichotomy?
Well, so again, it's a matter of scope. Moral normative claims apply to everyone, no matter their position, no matter the time. Prudential
Why
normative
why would they
claims,
have to apply to everybody all the time?
well, again, like that's what I'm saying. Where in your position, there isn't moral normative claims. There's only the prudential. There's only
Okay.
the things that people like. You would say there is a a good thing for you to do, but it's all dependent on a multitude of factors. Like
Okay, okay.
what
So
what
so
are
so
your what are you it would depend on you as a person. What are your goals and what are your values? Given those circumstances, I could say that befriending your neighbor is good, and we could say it's true for Ben based on these things.
okay, so so I think that's where the misunderstanding on my part has been, because you are defining moral normative claims as objective. So
Yes.
anything that I want to claim is still normative. I so here's kind of where the language game is, because I would still consider prudential normative claims moral normative claims, because I mean, to me it's still talking about morality. So
Yeah.
in my so I get, like, in your worldview you consider morality objective, so baked into whenever you say moral normativity you're going to already define that as objective. But because I'm the opposite, whenever I talk about moral normativity, that to me is inherently subjective. But
Yeah, this
I'm
is
okay with,
just a
we can just
failure
use
of
the
the
term
language
prudential.
here.
We can just use the term prudential if you want, but to me that's still describing morality, because to me morality gets at the nature of interpersonal, like human interaction, and the nature of how we coexist and treat each other. So that's how I define
Yeah, so
morality.
this is like a failure of the language and how we tend to use things. This is, I didn't put this on here, but this is also why usually in philosophy they actually make a distinction between ethics and morality, because morality, eh, they tend to talk about morality as assuming objectivity and how it applies to everyone, while ethics is more about, given this system, what is right and what is wrong. That's also why in college courses, like if you're going into the medical field, you would take like biomedical ethics classes, or why you would take engineering ethics or business ethics, because those courses aren't really assuming anything about subjectivity or objectivity, but they are saying, given your position in society within this business or within this job role, there are things that you ought to do.
Right.
um
Yeah, but so you would not consider that, or I guess most of, like, in your education and philosophy, those types of claims, they don't consider that in the realm of morality, or they would not call that a moral normative claim.
uh well, it's more for ease of teaching that they don't get into the idea of saying that this is a moral normative claim.
Okay.
um because they don't want to, and again, this might more reflect uh my view, um because in my mind prudential normative claims still exist, um but they're you I kind of see the prudential um normative claims as being like the output of the interaction of multiple moral normative claims, if that makes sense.
Yes,
Because
it does.
it's kind of like saying, I can say, don't kill, you ought not to kill. But then there's always the exception to the rule, right? Like, what if they're trying to attack and kill your family? Okay, now we've given an exception. In my mind, eh, there's we like to say exceptions because that's just like the easy way, but in reality it's various claims, various aspects that are intersecting in a very like unique way that results in this prudential way.
Yeah, that
So
makes sense.
in a weird way, in my view, prudential collapses into moral normative claims. But then you're on the flip side where moral normative claims just collapse into prudential normative claims.
Yeah, I guess if we're following the framework that you've laid out, yes, but that's just not how I categorize it in my head. I look at it like
Well,
anything that
it's
describes human interaction that affects like human well-being or interacts with like suffering is going to be in the realm of morality. And then what I would consider like another prudential claim is just like random self-interested stuff that has nothing to do with like affecting the well-being of another conscious entity is
yeah.
how I would
So
look at that.
again, there's the weird disconnect between everyone, including philosophers, tend to use morality and ethics interchangeably. It's only when you start getting, but that's just colloquially.
Right.
When you get into like the nitty gritty, they try to separate them and have a more stringent definition, just to not cause some of like the confusion that's happened. Um, a- Again, more the difference here. It's not that you can't have a moral claim and that be something prudential. The difference is what is making it, uh, what's determining the true false value of it.
Um,
Because prudential claims, again, are unique to a person, specific values they have, and a specific circumstance that they find themselves in. So it's more of an instance, and in that instance, what they ought to do is determined, while the moral is more just saying this is what you ought to do no matter
in
what.
like a hypothetical perfect ideal, but then you're saying that
Yes.
what so are you saying that moral normative claims kind of build a framework that is this ideal, perfect, hypothetical thing, but that whenever we get into specific instances in reality, all of those moral claims interact with the situation, they do their Sudoku, and then the output of that is going to be the prudential normative claim? Is that kind of what you're saying?
So yes, but it's important to qualify that that is my position,
Okay.
not a universal one,
Okay.
because there are still very many people within the religious community that would hold moral normative claims to be absolute, and that there isn't necessarily like an interaction. Um, a classic case that is usually talked about, um, and actually I put this on the notes. If you want to scroll down,
Mm-hmm.
oh wait, how much did I write about this? It might be easier for me to just talk about it.
I could just scroll down
Um,
into the further complexity section. I can that will take up the whole page.
oh yeah, it was under my CI.
Okay.
Um, it was,
Let me put this on a separate
I
page.
think it was Hume. Someone could flame me if I'm completely wrong on this, but you've probably heard the like uh, thought example of, it's like, okay, you're a very fundamentalist Christian. Then just imagine you're a white mom and that has
I'm
live, laugh,
imagining
love
it.
all over your house. Okay, um, and you read your Bible and you know that lying is a sin. All right.
Okay.
Now, uh, imagine you're also German and you're in World War II and you're harboring Jews in your basement.
Yes.
And the SS comes and knocks on your doors and goes, "We are looking for a group of Jews. Are they in your basement?" There are some people that still want to claim that in that position, saying no is a lie and is still morally wrong,
Hmm.
because there is no exception to this law that has been given.
Yeah.
Um, this also comes down to consequentialism morality versus why did I just go blank?
Deontological.
More the ontological. Um, is that's a position where if you say that it's still wrong, you're firmly on the ontological and none of the consequences matter.
Right. That's pretty extreme, right? Like that sounds like a very like maybe like a Protestant thing. I don't know. Um,
So here's the weird thing. It There are people that hold this, but I would say most of the people that hold this are not exposed to philosophy. Um, it's one of those things, kind of like politics of left and right. You hear so much from these minority groups that it seems like these positions are incompatible. But in reality, the majority of people are in this weird gray area that is some percentage of both a objective, quantified by, uh, consequence, or consequence with very little objectivity. So there's room for flexibility in here, but in terms of presenting it, it's always easier to present the extremes, first. Um, but again, I just point that out because a lot of people fall further into the extremities when they haven't done as much, like, I guess, critical thought about their own belief systems.
Right, and like another example like that that I've thought of that I've never really gotten a good answer from a Christian. Perhaps you can enlighten me on this, but the commandment. Most people call it thou shalt not kill, but I believe the more accurate translation is thou shalt not murder, right? And so
Yeah.
it's not that the taking of human life itself is wrong, but that you shouldn't murder specifically. But then how does the Bible even define murder? Is that contingent upon the legality of the state in which that act is currently taking place? So, like, if you were in Nazi Germany and they made it legal to kill Jews, is that's no longer legal murder? So, is that okay? So, does that objective claim become subjective, like relative to the state, or like how does that work?
So this is an interesting thing. So you are right. While people talk about the commandment as "Thou shalt not kill," uh, actually the more common translation is still murder. Um, but then I can't remember the word because I don't know, like, Hebrew. But there's actually been a lot of debate recently about the when I say recently, probably within the last 15, 20 years, in terms of academia, recent is very different. But there's been debate about even if murder is the correct translation that we should do there, because the word that is used, um, it, I don't remember all the details, but it implies actually a lot more specific kind of murder, like what the intentions were behind it. So it's even more specific. That's more just like a factoid that I think is interesting. But you're also pointing to the idea that something that you and me might be more accustomed to in terms of the Protestant, especially the uh, more recent Protestant waves within the last, like, 100, 200 years. Um, they tend to hold a position theologically that the Bible is not only, like, perfect, but that it has all the information that a person needs
Yeah.
in order to act according to uh, like, God's ruling. I think this would be a good instance, or a good thrust, to show the weakness of holding that position, is because to try to, like, synthesize what the entire Bible says murder is would be an astronomical, like, literary project. And I think it's also hard when you think about, again, there's many different historical time periods and cultures in the Bible. And so even if you looked at every instance of the word murder in the Bible, it's going to be describing various degrees of things. So again, I tend to fall more that there are some outside um, qualifications to that. Um, if I were to give, like, my opinion, and again, it would take, I don't have a written thesis on why I would hold this. I tend to hold murder to be more about the emotion that is had when one kills. And I would say that that is like the hate in your heart, or like revenge killing. So in that sense, it would still be something that is objective, and you could technically legally kill someone with the death penalty or defending yourself in some countries, but I could say that it's still morally murder and morally wrong because of the hate or emotions that were involved.
It's an interesting take. Yeah, I think that topic does get really complicated because then there's always the circumstances of self-defense and like, was it okay to kill the person? Should you have used less lethal force? I mean, and I just think that it all comes down to, because of course I'm a moral relativist and I just believe that it's it's up to you, man. It's all just gonna be
Yeah.
your judgment of the situation. Going forward, though, for the rest of the conversation, are you okay if when I use the word morality, and you understand what I mean by that, I'm just talking about things that affect human interpersonal
Yes.
interaction? Because whenever I say that morality is like subjective, then kind of baked into the language of my self-described position is, I'm in the camp that believes that normative moral claims can be subjective.
So a way I think that we can do that without it maybe getting confusing while maintaining, I guess, some of the technical terms, we could just call those moral statements, but we won't call those moral claims.
Okay,
Because
yeah,
if
that's
we get it,
fine.
if we get into the moral claims, that's when you start going down that chart, and then we would still want to call it moral normative claims, or if that makes
Yeah, I
sense.
guess, yeah, I can call them moral statements. I mean, because I use the terms normative and prescriptive, and ought kind of interchangeably. And I guess for the level of this channel and this audience, that's probably okay. Even though I know there's some slight quibbles about those definitions, but just as long as you know what I mean, then I think that's all that counts.
Yeah.
So,
It,
yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
I was also going to say, whenever I was talking about most of morality or like the history of philosophy falling into a certain category, um, it's important to qualify that I just mean that, like, if you walked in and you took like an introductory ethics class at any school, you're going to be learning about many different systems, and many of those systems, despite you not talking about in the class, are assuming a level of normative moral claims, not the prudential. And so that's all that I meant. It's not that there aren't people in philosophy. I would actually say a good chunk would be very similar positions to you, but those are relatively newcomers in the discussion of physics and ethics. And so you don't want to like get yourself confused and you like go back and try to like read about utilitarianism and then like read in this prudential type of morality into their system, because the assumption was a much more objective one for a very long time.
Okay, so you're saying that for most of the history of moral philosophy, when people have used the term morality, baked into that word has been this sense that it is something that should apply to every person on the planet all at once, and it is like an objective thing that everybody should do, and that is like the definition of morality to them.
That was at least the starting point. Um, it wasn't until, again, like with anything in philosophy, it got more and more complex. Like, I guess a way of saying it, if you look at like the history of civilization, much of the beginning of our civilization was, this kind of very strong religious influence. And baked into the religious influence was the more traditional view of objective morality. And, a lot of the, like, I guess if you want to go all the way back to like the pre-Socratics and like Socrates and Plato, there is an assumption about there being objective truth, both morally and not morally. And then once you got into maybe like the Renaissance and medieval periods, there were many Christian philosophers who were still holding objectivity, but they were beginning to prod and come up with those qualifiers that made it more prudential. but there wasn't many people like you who would completely just say all of them fall into preference until very recently. Does that make sense?
It does, and I think that is the final position that you stated, the one that I hold. You know, I, of course, because I hold it, I do happen to believe that it's the correct position. Just because if you can give me good arguments as to why that's not true, I'd love to hear them. But I've never been able to hear a satisfying defeater kind of that position, because I think that whenever you look at things through the lens of evolution, whenever you look at it through the lens of kind of just what I think is the reality of how humans interact, and because I don't believe in God, I think that morality is just an emergent social contract of reciprocal altruism that conscious beings agree to treat each other according to achieve certain ends. But maybe this would be a good point to do you just want to go ahead and kind of lay out your moral system, why you believe that moral facts exist, where they come from, and give some examples of those, and then I can give mine.
So I can, but I'll also qualify it saying, I mean, there's a system in here to some degree, but I wouldn't say that it's formalized. I haven't spent, I didn't take the Descartes approach and lock myself in my house for 4 years and write it all down.
Right.
Um, and
It's a true Chad
but
move on Descartes' part.
dude, I actually, Descartes is one of those people. He's kind of focused on as like people's introduction to philosophy. But I would also say that some of the negative, like parasitic relationships I got from philosophy came from him being my first introduction.
Hmm.
um, it- that's more due to my like anxiety and getting, if you go to philosophy, this is what I'd say to the entire audience. Philosophy is, I think it's a tool, and it's a really good tool to have, and it's also, I think, fun, but I'm not the most normal person, so not everyone's going to find it fun. But you shouldn't go to philosophy to find answers, because philosophy is the art of finding more questions. Um, and I definitely came into philosophy thinking I was going to find answers, and that led to this kind of like very draining pattern of deconstructing everything in a very like dark, Darketian sense. And then I got to the point where I was like, wait a minute, I've been attuned at tearing down belief systems that now I don't know how to build one up, and anytime I lay 2 bricks down, I knock them over. um that's kind of hinting at, like I definitely grew up religious, got into philosophy for religious reasons, then became unreligious and atheistic through philosophy, um, and then kind of found myself back in a religious slash theistic position.
And real quick, so
Um,
you grew up Protestant, but then whenever you found yourself back into it, you lean more towards the Orthodox Church, right? Is that accurate?
so again, I definitely highly respect the Orthodox tradition, and I happen to find going to those churches to be the most meaningful religious um, experience that I've had. But I also do not want to represent them, because I'm also not theologically aligned with them on a lot of things. Um, it's more a matter of pragmatism, really, for what I find. I've come in contact with a lot more genuine people in the Orthodox tradition, even if theologically I like disagree with them. Um, it just solved kind of some of the issues I had with Protestantism and a lot of the Americanized um, church that
Can
has
you list a
been,
few of those issues real quick?
mainly, if you've grown up in the Protestant tradition, there's this idea. Uh, I think this is a sweeping statement that might make people pissed.
Go for it.
There's in my mind, there's just a lack of like academic rigor associated with the Protestant tradition, which I find funny because when you look at the history of the church, Protestantism was basically the idea that like we don't want the church to tell us what to do. We want to interpret and do this research on our own, so to speak. But like with anything with education, you need a good teacher to learn on your own, or you're just going to end up thinking 2 + 2 = 17. And I kind of see Protestantism as being kind of this weird bastard child of all these years of people not really knowing how to approach interpreting the Bible. And so you get all these sects, like a new one's made every other day, it seems. You get
the infinite subdivision.
Yeah, like I mean, some of the most some of the newest religions that have been created have all been offsprings of Protestantism, even when Protestants deny them as being Christians, that being Mormonism. Why did I just go blank?
The Adventists, right?
The Adventists. You have a bunch of cults in the United States that have broken off that are a lot smaller scale. You have Christian Science. You have Church of the Latter-day Saints. Wait, isn't that just? I get Mormons and one of the other ones.
It's all very confusing. They're all weird.
Yes. Go ahead.
Well, just that it's just funny that you say that because I've kind of found a pattern with it's like multiple people now that I kind of knew in high school that grew up Protestant, kind of in the area that we grew up in, who became atheists and then they came back to Christianity later, but it was never back to Protestantism. It's either to Catholicism or to Orthodoxy or a bit more of a structured version of Christianity that they end up finding later.
Yeah, and so that is one of the things, and if you ever have Nick on here, he'll be able to get more into this, because in fact what I'm laying out is actually one of the arguments for Orthodoxy, but I guess you could also say it's an argument for Catholicism, is that in the sense of any like faith, faith is meant to both like psychologically and functionally serve as a kind of bedrock to a safe place to grow from. And so the argument is that like, well, here's this church that has has changed very little, almost none, in the last couple thousand years.
Are they still stoning people to death?
Well, okay, that you're thinking of the Jews.
Oh, okay.
The Orthodox Church didn't stone people. You're thinking of why did I just go blank? We were always bad-mouthing them in high school in Bible class. It's like the name for the high priests in the Jewish religion. They're the ones who like turned
the rabbis.
Jesus. Well, no, they don't. It's like a council, and there's a name for them. That's really gonna bother me now. But yeah, no, I mean, it does happen. I think it's Protestantism also has this tendency that it tries, especially here in like Texas and the South, a lot of the Protestant churches, like the new movement has been like this Bible churches or non-denominational churches.
Right.
And like the intent there, I think, is good. It wants to be inclusive to a vast majority of people. But the truth is that no matter which one of those churches you go to, you are technically getting sermon and theology that is tied to just one of these other sects, even if it's being presented as non-denominational. So even though the intention I think is good, I actually think it's kind of disingenuous and dangerous to be like selling a certain position as being this universal position that all of Christianity can agree upon, when the truth is that all of Christianity actually can only agree on a very small set of principles.
Yeah, have you ever read C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity?
Yes.
Yeah, so that was a book that was recommended to me when I was younger, and that is kind of like a quintessential Protestant kind of thing. Is it's just let's just try to consolidate and put on like a unified front of Christianity for the rest of the world. But of course, the more that I've kind of studied Christianity, the more that seems to be. I mean, there is a core of Christianity, like the belief in Jesus and the resurrection and stuff. But I mean that it basically ends there, right? I mean, there's so much areas or there's so many areas of divergence whenever you get out into like the actual like deep theology of these
Yeah.
different sects. So yeah, I think that Protestantism is the danger of it, of course, is that it's much more open to being modernized and liberalized and change over time, which to me is a good thing, as I like to see that happen to religion. But of course, if you're religious, you don't want that to happen to your church. So
Well, I also think there's a worry there that sometimes we get caught up in like labeling like modernization or liberalized as like this negative thing because it brings in the connotation of like religion versus progress is incompatible, or that conservatism is incompatible with liberalism. And but I think the issue is that the things that might get modernized and liberalized are the things that could cause bad results. And then the things that probably do need updating don't get updated.
right.
Like there's no way to differentiate between what is our bedrock, the thing that is unifying us, and what is just an outdated cultural norm. But in Protestantism, if it just opens the door that like anyone can come along, start a church, claim to be a pastor, and present this new thing, then like they can throw out and change anything they want, modernize it, and liberalize the things that were tried and true to like help people. Um, and I also just kind of generally this isn't maybe a Protestant thing, but maybe a more Western thing. Um, but Protestantism and Christianity has been like commodified and commercialized, and it's like it has cheapened the things that I think are good and true. Um, and I think that's why you see like that pattern with many people going from Protestantism to atheism and then back to a more traditional thing. Like even for me, if I disagree with like Catholic and Orthodox theology, I still find way more like value in a service that is structured and still maintains a kind of reverence and like holiness than going into a church that has 8,000 people in there and there's some dude with long hair and tight jeans playing Jesus I Love You, and it's on a mega screen in an airplane, that the pastor owns. Like
Yeah.
that isn't to say that like truth and like good cannot be found in those churches, but I find that a lot of modern people um, maybe dismiss some good things based on those bad things, if that makes sense.
For sure, for sure. So let's come back to religion soon, but I guess for now, do you want to go ahead and I guess before I asked you about kind of your backstory, get back to stating your position about do moral facts exist, where do they come from, and just kind of a general outline of your ethical framework.
Yes, but do you mind if I pee?
Yeah, for sure. I can cut
Okay.
it here, and then we can come back in a minute.
So you wanted me to more just generally lay out like my reasons for believing in God,
Just
or
like
more my moral.
more of kind of like your moral system, and I just the fact that it's based on kind of the moral facts about that come from God, and then maybe like you can give maybe some specifics about which moral facts do you think exist, and then also maybe talk about how you feel that you have come to know those moral facts, and how confident are you in asserting that you know God's objective moral facts?
Okay.
Just kind of that general realm, and then after that, I'll state my position on morality.
Do you need to like make a sign or something to formally start, or can I just?
You can just go. You can just go.
Oh, okay. So I would say that if again, I shouldn't like attach myself fully to like a philosophical system because I'm inevitably gonna misrepresent it and deviate from it in some aspect. But I definitely have a leaning towards what they would call like virtue ethics, um, which many people have heard of because it's more in the it was kind of started in more like the Greek era. Um, Again, Christian theologians then began to kind of take that and adapt it into what would be like more modern Christian morality and theology. Um, but this also goes back to what we discussed earlier. I think that the while the Bible does show us some moral truths, it's not in like a clear. It's not like the 12 commandments was something given at a time to basically simplify and make easily understood to a vast group of people. Most of the morality that Christians would hold to now is something that's much more, they would say, is more implied through the text. Um, and it's more a matter of virtues, not maxims. And this also kind of relates back to what I was talking about earlier. I do think there are objective, like moral truths, but there's something that has to be like contextualized to a certain instance. Um, the kind of classic way of framing virtue ethics would say, there's always two extreme virtues that people would consider virtues, but they are seemingly incompatible. Um, like for example, one might say that I can't think of a non-negative word to describe it. One might say that meekness or like your your willingness to, kind of keep your mouth shut and not, stir the pot, so to speak.
How about just being agreeable?
Yeah, agreeableness. If we want to use like the big five indicator. What's the opposite on the big five? Agreeableness and
Um, I mean, it would just be being like disagreeable on that
oh, okay.
spectrum.
I
Yeah.
forgot they don't do it. But so agreeableness on one, but then also some people would say that like brashness is also in its way or in its own way kind of a virtue, as there is a time and place to not be concerned with others when it'd be prudent to basically like rise above that and call it out, right? So we call both virtues, but in reality, it's the circumstances in which they're called to happen that we would say that they become virtues. Because if someone was always meek, they would just be a meek person. We'd probably call them a little beta soy boy or something. If they were always brash, we'd probably call them a dumbass or like a meathead.
Yeah.
So there's this kind of intersection of these seemingly incompatible traits that we can strive to be what they would call like the virtuous middle, the perfect, ideal combination of both meekness and brashness or something along those lines. Um, this is where you get into when you hear a lot of Christians talk about the nature of God. They would talk about how God can be both perfectly just and perfectly loving, or a very forgiving God. And those are something that, in like human terms, seem very incompatible. being both the person who dishes out judgment or righteous anger with a forgiving side. In the theological sense, they would say that God, by the nature of being God, is this perfect combination of these seemingly two incompatible things. Um, and therefore, ethics, or the moral thing to do, is to try to emulate God in the most simplest way. We as human beings are inherently limited and can never really get that middle point, but our job is to strive after getting there. I tend to think along those lines because it's a much more generalized way of thinking of things instead of thinking in terms of maxims. Um, because it kind of gives you a framework to work off of when you're in a new circumstance that seems like it would need some kind of exception to whatever rule I held. Um, but in fact, just like anything in philosophy, it probably creates just as many problems and just as many counter arguments, so on and so forth. Um, I might People might be disappointed to hear me say this of like, well, why do I think that's the right morality, or why do I think, God is real? After doing philosophy for a long time, you realize that we as human beings function on faith. That doesn't necessarily mean faith in the very religious sense, but we are always having to take a leap of faith at some point along with our logic. Um, and I find that kind of fortuitous in terms of all religions asking for some kind of faith in God, that we have also evolved in a way that requires us to daily make those kinds of jumps. While that isn't maybe in itself a very compelling argument to believe in a certain God or the existence of God, it's just something I find kind of like interesting, and at least just part of why um, I believe. Um, I think the other thing is that when you go down the rabbit hole of philosophy, we tend to think of ourselves, or at least when you start in philosophy, we tend to see our beliefs as kind of like a pyramid. Like, we have these wider or more encompassing beliefs about how the universe works, how our perception works, how our mind works, and then from there we build up. It's like you have to have premise one, and then premise two is, proved by like you go like that until you get your conclusion. So in my mind, you're always starting with faith of some kind to start with your first premise or your bedrock kind of belief. Um, and so there's a kind of maybe like logical consistency, if I may say, to accept a being in this position that you're putting faith in as also part of many theological positions, is how other aspects of the world then derive from the nature of whatever's in this like God spot. It makes some connection there between the physical and the non-physical, I guess I should say.
So are you kind of saying like in determining which God or which kind of doctrine you want to place your faith in, that in part is going to be determined by the pragmatic outcome of like the fruits of believing in it?
I didn't necessarily mean to like get into the full conversation about which God to choose there.
Sure.
I just
Sure.
meant that there's like basically all religions have some kind of theology to explain how the natural world kind of emulates or is an instantiation of some aspect of God. In Christianity, they talk about it as like, all creation has like the handprint or the signature of its painter. Um, and so having that as your premise that you put faith in kind of it provides some more organization to the progress of your beliefs. Um, it gives you a bedrock. But I feel like if you don't have that and you're an analytical person, then what you find yourself doing is like in a weird way, you're almost making more leaps of faith because you have to do that to every little different category in a way, because there isn't a fundamental thing in which all the others derive from, if that makes sense. So it's maybe you could think of it along the lines of like taking your leap to God is like one big leap of faith. But then if you kind of get rid of that spot, then you're doing more acts of faith, but they're smaller jumps. I'm speaking very metaphorically, and it's just, again, I don't know if that's probably a bit disingenuous, but it's just something that I guess I've thought about, because I remember basically when I became an atheist, part of what got me there was the fact that I kind of took a reductionist approach to Christianity. Like I got into school and then tried to unlearn a bunch of the things that I had been taught that I felt like wasn't supported now that I was learning about philosophy. But then I eventually got to this point where I had written off everything, and then I couldn't get myself to build any foundation about anything else. And so I basically became kind of the stereotypical, like what Christians talk about is like the atheistic nihilist. And I don't mean to like say that Christians will tend to be like, well, if you don't believe in God, then you must just automatically be nihilist. I think that's disingenuous. But I was kind of a stereotypical example that's what happened to me. And I think due to my philosophical background, I was very much aware at how often I was having to make leaps of faith just to do very simple things in my life. And that got me like thinking about the loss of this kind of bedrock of belief, if that makes sense.
Right. Yeah. And so you feel like you kind of you found your way back to God kind of as a result of, at least in part, kind of a desire for just some kind of structure or like kind of like epistemological bedrock upon which to kind of base a framework of like how to act and be in the world.
Yes, and this actually goes into something I had written in one of the things that you were talking about, is I do know that one of the big things that's, I guess, leveraged against religion is that it's been called the opium of the masses.
Right.
It's the thing to make you feel safe and secure and like your life has meaning. Um, and here's the thing, I'm religious and I actually completely agree with that. But I think what is disingenuous when people say that is they tend to say it as if any other position is not that.
Sure.
Especially, I think, again, kind of controversial, and I don't mean to make this sound like I oppose science, because as we've talked about before, I believe in evolution. There's very little things that science is like talking about that I reject. But I think science in its own way in the modern era has been repackaged and repurposed and resold as a replacement for religion. And the funny thing is, I think that repackaging has created many of the problems that people now see in science,
Right.
of how science is not being very scientific anymore. and it's more about proving your own, beliefs. Um, it- and so in that way, I think if you're gonna say that like religion is the thing that like it's the opium for the people and to like calm them down, then I think you also have to consider the fact that all of our beliefs in some aspect are a way to ease our minds. Um, but I think there's a virtue in there that both religion and science strives after that we could both agree on, and that's this searching. Science would say you keep experimenting, you keep testing until something, you find out your premise is undone. Your um, religion has a hard time with that, but I think they would also say that it's something that you should do is like search. Um, kind of got tangential there. But I guess that's my thing is that I don't think you can get away from, while that is a critique saying that, oh, it's just to like make you feel less lost in the void. I think no matter what position you land in, even if you try to land on just science and reject all spirituality, you I can leverage that same criticism to that side. And so I don't think that in and of itself can dismiss religion or any belief.
Right. Yeah. I'll respond to that, and then I'll try to segue that into me giving my ethical framework. But so I think that what religion is essentially, it's a package deal of a lot of things in one, right? I mean, so it explains the origins of the universe. It explains kind of where you go whenever you die. It provides community. It provides belonging. It provides like a moral, ethical framework where you can like live your life. And it additionally provides a lot of truth claims. It like mixed in with all of that other stuff and talking about like morals and values and everything. There's claims about history, and then there's claims that get at things that are in the realm of science. And I think that you can. I don't think that you have to take religion as one giant package deal. So I would totally agree with you that I think there's a lot about religion and it's beneficial. It's great for people to, have some kind of system of even broadly, even if they disagree on the specific interpretations or there's some leeway, having a general moral framework given to people coming from an omniscient being and the sense of community and kind of broader unifying purpose and like all of that provides is good. And I don't really have any problem with that inherently. I believe that it's false. I believe that God, in the theistic sense, does not exist in like a literal sense. But I don't have any inherent like issue with people believing in a religion. Aside from 2 points, the only 2 things that I don't like about religion are the moral claims that it makes and the truth claims that it makes, right? So the community and like all of that is fine, but it's the specifics of some of the moral claims, right? And so, and additionally, whenever it makes truth claims that are anti-science. So science cannot replace religion because all science is a mechanism for trying to get closer and closer to the best version of the truth that humans know how to conceive of. And so the only part of religion that science can sort of, defeat or replace, if you want to use those words, are the truth claims that religion makes if you take the books at literal interpretation, such as I don't know, talking snakes in gardens, or people rising from the dead, or walking on water and turning water into wine, and putting 2 of every animal on an ark, as if that would be a diverse enough gene pool to restart the entire world population of animals. Things like that. That I think there is something inherently dangerous to me about lowering the kind of standard of evidence of what we consider like reasonable to believe something that goes against what we observe the world to be like. So that's where I think that science trumps religion is in the truth claim area. But I know that a lot of religious people don't interpret a lot of that stuff literally. And so to me, as long as the person has faith in God, but they're willing to update their beliefs to fit the science, and more the factual description of how we increasingly are coming to know the world to be. That's fine. And I think even Thomas Aquinas in like the 13th century, said that if there's a contradiction between, or if that if your reading of the scripture contradicts the science, then you're reading the scripture wrong, or some quote to that effect. And that's kind of the philosophy that I like, and that I would hope that most people would take, who are religious. And we see that a lot, even like the Pope accepts evolution and stuff now. So in Catholicism, that's considered canon. Used to not be. So as long as things are open to being updated and revised, that's good. The second front is the moral front. I think that there's a lot of moral claims in the books that I either explicitly don't like, or that they at least implicitly do not speak against things that I think are fine. I don't like their stances on gay people, or any kind of broader LGBT issue. I think that they're pretty morally hazy whenever it comes to things like the role that women can play in family and in society. I think they're morally pretty hazy whenever it comes to things like slavery. And again, there's room to say, well, that was the Old Testament, or well, that wasn't meant in this certain way, or it was meant for these people at this time, as God was trying to move them into a better moral position, so he gave them like an intermediary moral injunction to get them to a better place eventually. There's all kinds of room for talk about that, but I think that we and this is more a critique of Protestantism, but we cannot use the Bible as the
evidence for the things in the Bible.
Yeah, like we can't hold the Bible up as the ultimate repository of moral wisdom, because there's so much room for improvement that I think comes from our own evolution as a species, even like socially, and our increased secular kind of understanding of the world. The more that we get away from literal interpretation, the more that we try to apply things like logic, and we explore philosophy, and we can see the harmful outcomes on human well-being as we choose to define it, that following certain religious doctrines results in. I think that we need to update those things too. And so those are kind of my only two qualms with religion, aside from the central, I think, factual claim of the existence of God being false. But I see the utility in it. I don't think science is a replacement for religion, because they don't even get at the same domain. There's some overlap where science beats religion, but the rest of it, obviously, yeah, people need community, they need purpose, they need moral frameworks, I think, generally. And I believe that even with religion, and we can get into this here in a few minutes, I'm almost done here, but I think that with or without religion, I think all we're doing is using our moral intuitions to arrive at moral preferences, and then we are socially negotiating with each other to kind of, come upon these kind of interobjective, agreed upon altruistic moral frameworks. We call that morality, and that is coming from a lot of things, like how our brains have evolved, our preferences that are going to be subjective and unique. And I think that atheists and theists are both doing that. I think that theists just have more of a basis, but even that they can bend and change and evolve and move. So I think that we're all doing the same process. I think it's hard to come up with a system of morality or ethics, or answer the question of what is right and wrong and how should people treat each other. That's a very hard question. I don't think there's an absolute answer for it, but I don't think that belief in God gets you any closer to solving it, because even with God, there's still infinite interpretation of how you want to live your life. And I think it ultimately all gets filtered through your subjective conscious experience, your preferences, and that's why I believe that morality is ultimately subjective.
So what's interesting to point out there is I think you're right that there is like an issue of like infinite interpretations of God, and then or of who God is, and therefore infinite interpretations about what is right and what is wrong. And I do think both sides of the coin, atheistic and theistic, are like in a weird cyclical way, like striving after the same thing. I guess the worry that I always had is that, again, there's infinite views of how to view God and morality on the theistic side. But then when you deny the existence of God or morality, then there's also infinite views. The
Sure.
difference comes from the fact that on this side, everyone is basically right about what they believe because it's just up to what you believe. On this side, the way I see is that yes, we can be wrong, but if you're believing there's a right answer, there's more motivation to search for it. So in a weird way, it's kind of like if we were going to use science as like a metaphor, no one would do science if we thought that nothing was constant, you know? Like the whole thing collapsed on itself and everyone would just kind of say, "Oh, well, at 8:07 on 5:31, gravity was 7.86, but tomorrow Jimbo might realize something else." So my thing, it again, maybe this is like a more of a pragmatic reason for belief, but in a weird way, my faith in God is also why I have faith that like, or it gives purpose to the search, I guess, so to speak. Um, oops, sorry, spam. I think the other thing that's important to point out is I think a lot of the problems that you have with religion are also problems that a majority of people in religion have with religion, even if it's not voiced as much. Um, and again, I think some of that might be holding too closely to old traditions. Um, Funny enough, a lot of the modern day problems that people have, specifically about Christianity, um, come from interpretations of only a very few passages, and there's much debate about the interpretation of those passages and the cultural context in which they are written. Um, so, but then there's these other parts of religion that I think. Have you ever heard the term like throwing the baby out with the bathwater?
Yeah.
Um, I feel like that's what happens with the religion a lot. It's like we've a huge group of people have made the conclusion about like homosexuality being wrong, about abortion being wrong, so on and so forth. They've done that on just combined those like three giant topics. There's probably like six verses between all of those that they're interpreting from. Um, but then there's these bigger things like loving thy neighbor and seeking the truth, all these virtues that are seen throughout many of like all the stories that have much more textual evidence that also gets, thrown away. And weirdly enough, I think it's those virtues that usually science also lands on, um, like being good things. Um, One of the things that I might get, I've talked to you how I tend to be such a moderate about so many topics that I just end up pissing off no matter who I'm talking to. Um, Christians will be mad about this because of one thing, or religious people, and then atheists might be mad about this for other things. But I do think there is a I would say there's a bigger consequentialist um, weight on morality than maybe most Christians would want to admit. Um, I do think the results have a lot to do with what is moral. But I also think that intentions matter because it's the intentions that determine the consequences for the individual doing the action. So, for example, we could use the lying example from earlier with the SS, like, knocking on the door trying to get Jews. Telling the truth there means a very big literal consequence as Jews are going to be killed that you were trying to protect. But I think we also should realize that there could be an internal harm to yourself by having to lie in that instance. That isn't to say that that one thing should outweigh the literal consequences that happen in the world, but it's just to say that we shouldn't necessarily always view as the extremes of pure consequentialism or pure like maxims. I think the other big thing is science focuses on the consequences to get, I said that really weird, on the consequences to get at morality. The issue there is that from the scientific perspective, what makes it right is just the consequence. Why do I keep saying it like that? Is just on the consequences. I think it's because my throat's getting dry because I'm talking a lot.
Same. That's why I poured a cup of water for myself.
Yeah, I did too, but I think I finished it. Like, I have like one sip left.
You can go restock if you need to.
Oh, right. But I guess what I'm saying is my worry is that in the scientific approach, what is good is just what has the best outcome. But inherently, when we are doing something moral, we cannot know the outcome before we act. So in a weird way, having good be good outcomes, it's kind of just like self-evident, but it isn't really like helpful for us as moral agents trying to act in the world, because it has to, what determines the truth or false value is something that can't be determined before we act.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it kind of does help, though, right? Because I think that I'm of the mind that, like, deontological morality, like any, quote-unquote objective value claim or the appeal to, it's right because God says it's right, I think it's, excuse me, I think it's all just consequentialism with extra steps. Because if you asked a person, well, why should I do this thing that God told me to do? And they're like, well, because it's the right thing. And you're like, well, like, what if I do it and it's bad? And they're like, well, no, because God wouldn't tell you to do a thing that would be bad. Like, the result is going to be good if you just trust him. So with any appeal we try to make to deontology, we're using a consequentialist framework, because I believe that's how we evolved. I view all this, I think whenever you view all of it through the lens of evolutionary psychology, to me, that's the framework that makes every puzzle piece fall into place. I mean, we are consequentialist beings. We are, ends-oriented creatures. And I think that that's all anybody is doing. But some people object to that and say that, well, then wouldn't you just end up in hedonism? And I would say, well, no, because the thing that happens, and I'm going to kick myself for this, but I'm going to reference Jordan Peterson. One of the few things that I think that guy gets right is the idea that you need to figure out a way to not only maximize your well-being now, but across time for all the possible future iterations of you can also have the opportunity to maximize their well-being, and to do that in a way that is stable, and you're able to do that in a way that maximizes the well-being of the people around you and your family and like your broader framework, because that in the end consequentially is going to be the best thing for you as well. So it's not just a matter of, go do heroin to maximize your well-being now, because then you lose your ability to have that later. So I think that that's the way that the human brain works. I think that is what our wiring is geared to gravitate towards. If we're smart enough to realize it and to be like, I should withhold instant gratification to maximize, to stabilize my ability to experience well-being across time, that's where people will end up if they're pushed in proper directions and they're smart enough and they have good environments and good influences. And I think that that's all anybody's doing. I think that's what Christians do. It's what atheists do, theists, Muslims. I mean, we're all on that quest. And I just think that the idea that we get our morality from God, I think it's false. I think it comes from yourself. It comes from your mind and your moral intuitions. And maybe there are things in the Bible or from other, texts that you can take from to base certain values on, but I feel like those are things that you could pretty easily arrive at as an atheist. as well, because whether or not God exists, like if we imagine our universe, we split into two, they're copies. One of them, God never existed, and we're just here, and we don't know how it just arose out of some absurdity, and then the other one was designed by God. In both of those universes, I mean, it would still hurt to touch a hot stove. It would still hurt to be punched in the face, or to be called mean names, or to, be in a war-torn country where your family gets bombed in front of you. Like, these things, pain would still hurt, and things that feel good would still feel good. So it's like, to me, I start from the phenomenological perspective, and I think, okay, like, I'm here, I'm conscious. Certain things make me feel good. Certain things make me feel bad. I'm wired to operate in certain ways where other people are too, and that's where I think all these values come from. Is just with or without God, our situation is the same, in my opinion, and we have reason enough to be moral and find ways to coexist in the most optimal pro-social way. We need not appeal to the divine in order for that to be a worthwhile goal.
Yeah, and so this is where it's interesting, especially if you're someone like me who accepts evolution. Um, is I do think evolution can account for some of our quote unquote moral behavior, but I don't think it can account for all of it. I kind of have like two things that I want to touch on here. Um, the first one being it kind of gets into, I guess you call it like the philosophy of biology or the philosophy of science. Um, and then the second one has to do with, I think I forgot the second one, so we're just going to focus on the first one. But if you're understanding the progress of moral evolution through that kind of Jordan Peterson perspective, that seems very hard to support scientifically, in the sense that the way that we generally understand genes and evolution is by the the term that the phrase is like lost a lot of meaning because people have said it so much now, but like survival of the fittest. And yes, there are documented cases of this biological or evolutionary altruism that we've seen, like in monkeys, etc. But those are always a lot more clear-cut cases of where giving up, like a mother giving up her meal to a child ensures the survival of, that like gene pool or something along those lines. But I think it's a lot harder to explain or even conceptualize genes as being able to think in the terms of like really long term, which seems to be what you're getting at, is that, like, again, sacrificing the now to stabilize the long term. It seems like they can understand, like, there's some kind of biological understanding of the future survival, but I don't know if we could extend it that far, if that makes sense.
Where's the line you think that evolution leaves us with?
Well, it gets complicated because for me, I see evolution as the tool or mechanism that God has put into place. So it's like the way that God chose to automate the universe. It's still like part of his creation and is like his hand or interaction with us, but it also kind of like shows the majesty or how beyond his knowledge is that he can put something not himself and design it in such a way to maintain things in the way that he wants. There's some complications there that I haven't really fully like wrapped my head around yet, in terms of like, well, if you think generally of the fall in a more traditional sense, did the fall also affect like that design of how evolution was supposed to work? Is that how we got more skewed towards like the violent survival of the fittest, of like eating everything we come in contact with and killing, but that's beyond the point. Um, I guess that would be my worry, is like, how far can we really stretch our understanding of genes and how they act in a certain way? And basically what I'm motioning at is like, I do think there's some, this goes back a little bit to what I was saying earlier. While I definitely take consequences into account, there are some virtues that I think a lot of people accept as a good, but I don't think can be explained in maybe more the framework that you have. Like, if I were to ask you if you thought self-sacrifice was like a moral good or a virtue, would you say yes?
Would just depend on the context. Yeah, I mean, if you're self-sacrificing for something dumb, then no. But if it's like a noble thing, then perhaps it could be.
Yeah. So in those cases where you are doing it for a good thing,
Yeah,
when we try to explain those, notice you said it becomes a good thing if you're doing it for the right thing, right?
yeah,
So the the reason or the purpose of the sacrifice that determines if it's good or not.
yeah,
But if we're trying to explain that same circumstance in the terms of evolutionary development, the more logical way to explain the self-sacrifice is that we are assuring the future generation of our genes, whether that be our kids or the monkeys, kids, things like that. Their mom, kills the predator that was going to kill its kids, but it dies as well. It self-sacrifices itself, but there's still this kind of gene saving propagation. But notice when we make that explanation, what made the self-sacrifice good was not that you were doing it for the right reasons. It was just that you're saving your offspring.
Well, right, because I would say that to most people, they would consider that the right reasons. I have what I consider like good reasons to be self-sacrificial, but that's not going to line up with other people's, which is why I would say, like, if I was to make a prescriptive claim to somebody of should you be self-sacrificing, I would ask them, like, well, for what? And then I would tell them if I think it's a good cause to do that for or not. Like, I would want people to be self-sacrificing to further a socio-political order that I want or that I think is good. I wouldn't want people to be self-sacrificing for a political order like ISIS, if they're going to blow themselves up, because I mean, to them, that's very good. To me, it's not. And so I would, but to them in that framework, which I think is morally reprehensible and is wrong, but that's just that's a statement of my preferences, I guess.
Yeah. So again, it comes back to that, but basically the push here is that if we try to explain that circumstance in the terms of a evolutionary standpoint, all we can really say is them dying for their political cause must have had some kind of benefit to offspring or something like that.
For sure.
And if it doesn't, then then that person's just an outlier and their genes died for good reason.
Yeah, that behavior. I mean, because we're the descendants of the people that I mean, we are. There's already a selection bias of the kind of traits that are the most, that predispose us to continuing our group or our kind of people group, or like whatever term that you want to use for that. Now, if you want to call that like direct genetic lineage, or just your broader community or a group that you choose to come to identify with, like on the basis of a religion or a political belief or something, that's something that has evolved as consciousness, I think, has become more sophisticated. We have been able to kind of co-opt this original evolutionary drive that was only evolved for direct genetic offspring or people whose genes were close to you. And I think the more we become more cognitively complex, it creates this self-looping mechanism where we become metacognitive and we can decide, okay, I still feel this drive, but I can actually channel this into causes beyond just my immediate, like, most proximal genetic pool. I can do this for causes, for belief systems, because the real thing that drive is getting at is preserving, like, your group or your people. What is your group or your people? historically it's been genetic, but I think that today, I mean, we've realized that can be whatever you make it, and I think people like having some kind of transcendent value structure to kind of set to sacrifice themselves for.
So then, but do you think like evolution, if this like continues long enough, that somehow even down to the gene level, it will understand that group as being something worth like encoding for future generations? Or is just something that consciousness has given rise to, but the genes are always going to continue in this kind of selfish gene, to not make a quote of the book?
Um, I'm not sure what you're asking. Can you rephrase that?
Um, so you're saying that like with the rise of like cognition and consciousness, that now we are able to choose who is our family or our group, and we can focus our energy towards that and make it rationalize sacrificing for whatever that group is. But on the genetic level, do you think that would start getting encoded? Because it doesn't seem that like the genes don't have consciousness, right?
Right.
There's just the need of like propagating in survival. While with consciousness, we can choose to recontextualize in a group as our family. That is kind of disconnected from that like encoding biologically.
Are you saying that because the people kill themselves off, they can't pass the gene along? That is self-sacrificial?
Yeah, I guess what I'm saying is, why does self-sacrifice keep occurring?
Well, so I would say it's because the people who, and we can extend self-sacrifice to not just mean like you die for something, but you can sacrifice all kinds of things for stuff, right?
Yeah,
Like your
there's
time and your
degrees.
energy and your, well, yeah, and it's because the people that do that kind of stuff build the societies that last the longest, and they build the, kind of the groups of people that go on to survive and reproduce more. I would say
Oh,
that's
it's
probably how it's always been. And so the I'm not saying that like there is like a specific gene that is like you will die for this cause, because of course that wouldn't get, there's no way for evolution to like to select for that, but just the general nature of self-sacrifice is a subcategory of the trait of altruism, or just being pro-social, willing
yeah.
to sacrifice certain things for the sake of other people in your group, and that is a trait that evolution has definitely selected for.
Yeah, this is again, it's one of those areas where you can begin to see like the difficulties of language, especially when talking about evolution and genes. Is we talk about we have to talk about them in a way as if they are have a conscious or have a design, even though
Right.
we're also talking about it as if they don't. Um, this is actually one of the things, again, is to like loop it back, that I find is some more evidence, is that when we talk about evolution, uh, and its like structure and purpose in us, we do it in a way that seems like it has a design, even though we're saying it doesn't. Um,
Yeah, because I think that kind of the design is, of course, we are kind of retrospectively projecting that onto the process to explain how we got to where we are right now. But in a way, I mean, there is a, not design, but there is a direction that evolution must logically go in, that must be some kind of pro-social existence. If you're a species that socially interacts, and you have to select for some level of altruism. So it is like it, yeah, it's not design. I'm trying to think of a good word for it, but it's like it is the logically necessary direction and outcome. Once you put the chess pieces in place, you can predict the direction that they must go, because there's no other way that evolution could have directed us to have some balance of self-interest and altruism. Now, where exactly that is, there's some variability, but yeah.
well, and we define that push as like the survival of the fittest. I know that's not maybe the
Yeah.
best
Yeah,
term,
yeah, it's close enough.
but how does that push begin? How does it come about from chaos?
I have no
framed in it.
idea. I have no. I mean, are you asking like how like about like abiogenesis, like how life began at all?
Well, not even that, but like, do you hear what I'm saying? Even if we don't want to call that a design, that push or direction has to have an origin that we can explain.
It.
And
I'm not sure if we can explain it, but it certainly has an origin. I just don't think that it's like knowable, like where life comes from at all, or why life values its own existence and has a preference to, you know.
well, also it's like, why does, again, life preferring its existence, it's easy for us to understand that because we're conscious and aware of our mortality.
Yeah.
But for the vast majority of evolution, life is not aware of itself and therefore does not value continual existence.
Not on the cognitive conscious level that I think we're used to, but I think and this is, this is so out of my wheelhouse, but just the way that I look at consciousness is it is I mean, it scales. I think it's pretty intuitive. It's pretty like a priori that it's because I mean, like, even if you look at like a baby, like that thing has no idea what's going on, but there is you count the seconds and eventually that baby turns into me or into you, right? So consciousness clearly scales from a fetus to a fully grown adult and possibly even beyond that one day. And I think animals are on that spectrum. And so, I mean, they are conscious. I mean, they're having some kind of experience. I don't think that they don't really have like a metacognitive ability or the ability to, you know, have complex thought or language or bargain with the future or kind of create fictitious versions of themselves and kill them off in different scenarios to make choices like we do. But I do think that they feel things, they do want to exist. It's just at a very like rudimentary level. And I think that's built into them because every being that maybe didn't have that died. And so we logically, not necessarily any animal alive today must be the descendants of, billions of generations, or probably not billions, but a lot of generations, millions of animals that did have that drive. So that's my
Okay,
theory on
I
it.
get what you're saying.
Yeah.
Because again, like that's one of the things that's like really hard to like conceptualize. Like thinking about the first, single cell organisms that
Oh, it must have been fucking crazy. Like,
arrived in the what do they call it, the photasm or whatever.
yeah.
And it's like, did they know to start eating things, or is it like they just kind of like popped into existence and then died as one of the other ones realized you could eat the other one first and it just felt like doing it and then that one propagates itself more because it was the first to think, oh, I have to like do something.
Sorry, I got to write this thing down real quick. It just popped up on my screen. Yeah, I have no idea. That's just like such a fundamental and deep question about like how did life originate? What did the first life forms look like, and how did that process begin? I just have no idea. I have no clue.
Yeah.
I'm certainly open to some kind of like higher dimensions, higher planes of existence, that could get at what we would consider to be some kind of deity or some kind of like thing. I mean, the universe and life. I mean, it could be self-writing. It could be. I mean, there's so many possible explanations of. I mean, in the first place, how things came to be from nothing, and then B, how life started, and then how we go from atoms and rocks to like organisms that are pumping these like lattice networks of blood through our organs.
Yeah.
There's certainly something very beautiful and cool happening, but I just don't think that the genesis of that, I think, is so far beyond what we have the hardware to even conceive of that I just don't even try anymore.
Yeah.
I used to think about that a lot, but now I'm just like, I just can't know. I don't think.
Yeah. It's only to point out that like the kind of push I'm trying to do there is that the system of evolution does make sense when you're kind of looking, like if you're looking at it as if like dominoes, right? It makes sense when if like a few dominoes have already like fallen, but it's really hard to understand and conceptualize how that first domino fell to get this momentum going unless there was some kind of intentionality there. Um, but like you said, then there's kind of these, maybe we can peel the higher other dimensions and things like that. Um, and that actually goes into like whenever I was responding to some of the things on our document that I was calling like the God spot, is like right now theoretically, I mean there's a bunch of different uh uh theories, but people always want to bring up like the Big Bang theory. And even in that theory, the thing that is infinite is matter and some other like uh whether that's like gravitational pull or something like that, that then pulled those things together to cause the collision, to cause the Big Bang, right?
Right.
Um, so one of the other things is people can get hung up on like, well, God's so ridiculous. It's something that's infinite, never ending. It's like whatever your belief system is, something goes in that category.
Like the unmoved mover thing, like the genesis of all
Yes.
existence. I would agree. I think it's equally absurd that it came from absolutely nothing, or that there has existed a, like an eternal being or kind of consciousness or force that then made it. Those two things are both beyond our ability to comprehend.
Yeah. We have two very ridiculous like
Yeah.
conclusions to make.
Yeah.
In my mind, I think it's more the fact after you make that choice at the beginning, the thing that is even harder for me to understand is the literal impossibility of every other thing that had to happen the exact correct way for the universe to even be created, and then for the universe to been created in a way that created life, and then for life to like
Yeah.
there's more miracles in that than there's miracles in the Bible.
Yeah. Yeah,
um
no, for sure. But I mean, I would just say, and like, not to dismiss the beauty of that, but there's this allegory that I'm remembering had something to do with a puddle, and I don't remember what it is, but the basic idea is that it's like, if there are, say, infinite universes, or even if, there's infinite planets or like whatever, that like eventually, if there ever does exist one that meets all those conditions, that's going to be the one that we're going to be in. It's going to enable us to have this conversation. So it's like, as we look back, that's going to seem like, oh my God, all these things had to happen. But I can say that right now, like, isn't it insane that for me to exist, my parents and their parents and like everything, like the exact sperm had to meet that egg millions of times for me to exist, and it's
yeah.
just that's like a one out of to the 10 to the negative like trillionth power. But that makes sense, and that seems crazy if you look at it like going forwards. But if you look at it from the end, it's like, oh well, the probability that happened is 1 out of 1 because I'm here and I'm talking about it. And if things had gone a different way, then all of the other hypothetical billions of people that could have existed instead of me would be saying that same thing about their reality as they look backwards at it. So it's kind of like, I get the desire to be like, how miraculous, but of course that's going to be the universe and the way that things played out that would cause us to be here, to be able to observe that.
Have you ever seen like, I think there right now in mathematics there's actually some debate about this, but there's like a meme a while ago where it's like some person was like writing out on paper like teaching like a little kid math, and the kid was real young, and the kid just learned what the infinity sign was, and the person teaching him, just to like fuck with him, put infinity plus infinity and then tried to see what the kid would do. So the funny thing is like some people would say, well, like if one thing's already infinite, it, when you add infinity to it, it actually doesn't change its value, so to speak. While other people might argue that like that there's degrees of infinityness or something.
Right.
Um, so when we talk about like the God spot, you said it does make sense. If there was an infinite number of planets or infinite number of universes, then one very likely would develop life. But then the question goes back in, what's easier to believe? A single infinite thing, that being something more traditional of a god, even if you want to like take out some of the personality aspects, or infinite infinities being
Right.
universes. Um, and and I don't know. It's just like a weird thing to like think about. And so again, it kind of goes back to maybe some of my leanings towards like a creator is there's a kind of logical like reduction or some attempt to simplify the infinite number of like questions or impossibilities.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, I'm totally not opposed to the idea of like deism, or that there is some kind of this thing that created the universe. Now, like whether or not we want to like sort of assign like a consciousness to it or like a whatever, I think that I think that the most we can ever say is that maybe there's something that made the universe. Like, I think that sentence is as much as we can ever say about it. And I think every word you utter after that sentence is just going to be, by definition, I mean, it's just, it has to be not knowable. Like, anything after that will be nonsense, because it's like we cannot possibly claim to have any knowledge of something that outside of our capacity to know. And I think that's why I am opposed to theism specifically, because I mean, as we've talked about, there's a huge leap between, oh, well, maybe something made the universe, like who knows, it seems pretty miraculous, okay, and then you leave it at that, and that's the end of the conversation, to theism, to, oh, it's this god and this book and these claims and like all this and that and that. And so I just think that to me, I mean, theism is to take that, what Freud called the oceanic feeling, or what people have called it a lot of different things, but it's like that sense of awe of like, how did this get here? And then needing, and I get it, we don't like to say that we don't know or we can't know. We need to have answers to things. So I get the desire to want to say like, oh, well, I think it's this god, and he's a being, and he cares about me, and he like talks to people, and he wrote these books, and he like does this stuff, and like I get why humans have been doing that for thousands and thousands of years. But I just think that I would rather settle for no answer than a bad one. And I think that the belief in theism is a bad answer, because it's possible, but I don't think there's any good reason to believe it's true outside of some kind of pragmatic consequentialist framework, in which case that's not like an argument for it being really true. It's just an argument for like, I just kind of want to believe it because it's fun. And I will actually accept that as an answer. Like, if a person told me, realistically, I have no way of knowing this, it's probably like not even true, but I feel like I just want to believe in this and live out this pattern and be a part of this, because it just kind of feels like, like it's fun and cool, and why not? I would say that's like, I can respect that more than the position that like people saying like that, I don't know, that they actually think that a theistic God is actually like literally real, because that's just so
So,
fantastical to me.
question. You're talking about the gap between believing something created the universe to like the traditional theism.
Yeah.
I think we should also like qualify that what we think of as theism is actually a very limited subset of what could realistically be defined as theism.
Hmm.
Um, and what I mean by that is, again, because when you accept a religion or a theistic position, there seems to be a lot of premises that are then lumped onto what God is like or what that something is. But how would you feel about trying to, like, again, if there's something out there that created the universe, and we know that it's something that's like beyond our understanding. Like any attempt to categorize it or explain it is going to be very reductionist or eliminate some part of it. But don't you think, or how would you feel about trying to give it some kind of characteristic based on just our observation?
I would just say that any attempts at that, I think, would be futile, because again, I just think that it's beyond what we have the capacity to ever know, and like not only to not understand, but to even be able to conceive of what it would be like to understand. Like it's orders of magnitude above, I think, our level of consciousness that we have. And I would just say, like, man, this cough will just not go away. What I think is the most worthwhile thing to concern ourselves with is how we ought to act and how we ought to be, and like how ought we conduct ourselves in the world, because being is doing, it is acting. And I think that is completely achievable, and we can come up with frameworks and systems and stuff that meets our ends without appealing to trying to describe characteristics of a god, because I think any attempt to do that is just going to be us projecting from our own minds, because the only place we have to pull information from whenever we don't know is ourselves. So we're going to pull out our own sense of like moral intuitions and like, well, I feel like God must like be like a good God, and like he probably should be something that is going to like care about people and want us to like not, you know, shoot grandmas in the head on the street for no reason, and probably, you know, he's going to be loving, and there's some sense of like justice and order, because that's what we want there to be. And I think that's the honest position.
So, question though, you said that the more important thing is for us to find how we interact with one another.
Yeah, like what are the best ways for us to be
Okay.
and to act in the world? More so than trying to answer the question of like, where did it all come from?
So that statement seems to imply that there is a objective way that everyone should interact with one another
No,
that isn't just prudential.
that's just my preference. It's my preference that everybody should act that way. I wish
Okay.
everybody would act that way, but of course,
So
like objectively, there's not a objective component to that claim. That's just my brain, my chemistry, my desire. I wish that everybody in the world could like hold hands and sing Kumbaya and get along, you know?
but do you see how there's a weird language thing that comes up once
Yes,
you're in
yeah,
your
yes. So,
position?
so can I try to solve that though? Because I think it is. I don't think it's like a like any kind of like actual philosophical problem or like logical inconsistency. It's just a language and a glitch. And what that is like when I say this is wrong or everybody should do this, I'm stating my preference. There is an invisible asterisk after those statements, and that asterisk is according to me and my values and my brain at this point in time. Right? So even if I don't state that explicitly, any statement anybody makes ever, there is that the grand existential asterisk after it of like, this is just my opinion, this is my preference, this is my interpretation of reality. So I can still say that I think that everybody ought to do this, and you know, I will try my best to impose that value onto the world, because I believe that that is synonymous with being alive itself. I mean, to exist and to interact with the world at all is to attempt to impose your values onto it and attempt to make the world more like you want it to be. There's no way to engage with the world that doesn't involve you doing that on some level. And I think that the idea, this weird like version of moral relativism where people are like, well, who are you to say what's right or wrong? It's just such a bullshit, stupid thing that it's just such a bad
It's
interpretation of it.
it's kind of a
That
straw man. It's
yeah,
definitely presented as a straw man.
because there are some people, there are like moral relativists who will say that, these like atheist types who will be like, well, who are we to say other cultures are blah blah. It's like
Yeah,
that's so
they're kind of the
ridiculous, because
Reddit
it's like, well, of course
version
we
of
can. There's no other way things could be. I mean, because by saying that, you're making just another value claim. You're saying that we can't judge things as right or wrong. So to judge a thing as right or wrong, they're saying it's wrong. And so yeah, it's just it's
so,
circular and self-defeating. So I do think that as close to an objective moral claim as I can make, like, I believe that this is wrong or this is right, and I would stop this if I saw it in the world. I want things to be more this way. I want to pass policy to make it happen, influence people to make it happen. That you could call that as close to like my version of an objective value, but I would call that my subjective preference that I want to universally impose. And I would say the way that I achieve that is through inter-objectively kind of coming to a social contract with other people who agree with me.
So, do you think you're saying how it's your preference that you would like to like oppose or like put on the world?
Yeah.
But don't most people feel like trying to force other people to follow what you believe is wrong? Like,
yeah.
Like, isn't that the argument? Like, most people would say totalitarianism or like some kind of like, Nazism is wrong. And usually the thing that people point out as being wrong is the fact that it like subjugates others that don't believe that into believing that. It's also the argument against most people have against religion. So
I think that's a bad argument. I think if anybody makes that, that's not the argument that should be levied against fascism or against religion. I would say that the thing, we all impose our values on people. I think that the question becomes, how wide is the bandwidth of acceptable disagreements of value where we are willing to allow people to exist within, outside of which we will, maybe enact force against people. But how wide do we make the bandwidth? Where can we agree to disagree? And what are these specific values that we're imposing?
So it's not that opposing your values on others is wrong, but there is a degree at which it turns wrong. I just again, I know you're talking about your preference, but
this is all within the context of my preference.
Yeah,
just to be clear.
I'm not trying to catch you in another like linguistic game. But that's what you're saying, because like usually the thing
there's nothing wrong with trying to impose your values on people, and I'll give this as an example. I think that one of my values is that people shouldn't murder each other in like just cold blood. So that's a value that I impose on people. That's a value that America, we as a country, impose on people because we make murder illegal. And if you murder somebody, we throw you in prison or we kill you, right? So that is an example of us imposing our values. So anytime you tell a person, hey, you're walking down the street and you see a person about to like punch a baby in the face, you're like, hey, what the fuck is wrong with you? Don't punch that baby in the face. You're imposing your value on them, So yes, by definition, we are going to impose our values on people. The tension comes between whenever and we can coexist with each other while still imposing our values on each other if we exist within, again, that acceptable framework of disagreement. So there's a spectrum of values that if we can say, okay, like it's okay for us to coexist as long as we stay in these bounds. Once you step outside of that, that's whenever we use force to stop people. And so the tension really comes between, well, there's some tension even within the acceptable framework. That's fine. I guess what we would consider like the really bad version of tension, or things like war or genocide, or like whenever like horrible things happen, is whenever people are trying to coexist with values that are incompatible, and either they try to compromise, and if they can't be compromised, then one has to win and one has to lose, and then it just comes down to power. And I think that is the descriptive reality of the world as we try to apply our prescriptions onto each other. There's some prescriptions that are just so, diametrically opposed, and they're just not compatible. And that's whenever we go to war with people, and that's whenever we throw criminals in jail. We deem you're allowed to slap a person in the face. There's a small penalty for that, we say, in this country, but it's not like a huge thing. But if you kill somebody, if you rape and murder and go on a rampage, well, that's something that we're going to put you in prison for life for, right? So that's outside of the realm of what is acceptable. And I happen to agree with that sentiment, probably because I'm a product of this culture. But I just think that in the end, I mean, it does just kind of come down to power.
So to kind of even go full circle, I know we're probably going to have to stop soon.
Yeah, I'm good with whatever. I'm loving it. So.
Is that notice what you what's kind of been going on is when things become just preference, and when you then begin to describe the world and its reduction to just power, what you end up doing is being all the claims end up being descriptive.
Right. Yeah, because that's just me giving the descriptive claim of how reality is. But then within that, my prescription is that I want this worldview to win out, of course, and I would act that out.
I guess what I'm getting at is that internally, like, have you ever been at a crossroads in your life? You don't know what to do or what to believe.
Oh, yeah, sure.
So this kind of worldview can describe the world, but it doesn't give you any guides about what to prescribe.
Why not? Why can't
Well,
it?
I guess what I'm saying is because internally when you're thinking, I'm not saying that individually we can't come up with like prescriptive things that we want. But what I'm saying is as a framework or as like a worldview, it doesn't tell you or give you guidelines of what to do.
Which part of what I said, though? Because I mean, I'll agree with you that the factual description I gave, that differing groups of people that have different values that are incompatible at a certain point have to fight each other, then it just becomes about power as to who wins. That's a true statement, but I agree that that statement is completely separate from actually coming up with values.
I guess part of the confusion is when I brought this up. What I'm saying, if we go back to just like your moral position of things being preference, when you state a preference for what you want the world to be, you're describing how you want it to be.
Right.
But internally, how do you arrive at your own preference? Like, you get what I'm saying? Like,
yeah, of course.
If there is, like, of course we could say that there's these values that you currently have that, given these values, makes sense to do this.
Yeah.
But then what justifies the values you've chosen? It seems like it would eventually reduce to kind of the thing that you would say you would respect someone doing, where they'd just be like, this sounds like fun.
Yeah, well, so my answer to that would be that I pick the values that I want. I don't think that I control my desires. I didn't author my brain. I'm the product of processes that are far beyond me. And so all I know about myself is that I exist in this present moment, and I have this body, and I have this mind, and I know that certain things make me feel good, certain things make me feel bad. If somebody hits me, that feels bad. If I hit them, I'll probably feel kind of guilty. If it was for no good reason. I like interacting with people. I like talking with my friends. I like talking to you. I enjoy human interaction, and I especially like it whenever it's friendly and positive, because that makes me feel good. I think it, from a scientific level, it produces oxytocin and serotonin and like dopamine and stuff in me. But from an experiential level, all I know is that it just feels good. I like it. I like doing this, and I like being pro-social. And, I kind of build my moral framework from there. It's just from my raw experience kind of sets an orienting mechanism of what things do I like and what feels really good, and then what things are really bad and what things hurt me. And then, of course, there's also the balance of what things feel good now but hurt later. And then I kind of have to use my metacognitive abilities to delay gratification, cultivate things like discipline, and then trying to get into, having hobbies, interests, talking about philosophy, politics. How do I want to organize the world to maximize what I perceive as well-being for the most people? I mean, yeah, like that's where and you could just call that moral intuition. You could call it maybe I have no choice but to pick the values that make me feel the best or that I want. Because again, my brain, the things that animate me precede me. And so,
Yeah,
in a sense,
that like
yeah.
biological determinism.
Yeah, I think that's a big part of it. I think we maybe I consciously feel like I'm choosing certain things, and I live as though I certainly do, and that I live as though I have will, and I make choices and I do stuff. But I think we're parameterized within tram lines to a certain extent. I think most people, because of our biology, like for example, it's very, very rare to have a person who enjoys what most of us would consider suffering, like being completely alone, being widely hated, having no relationships or positive interactions with people. They feel nothing whenever they hurt people. Those people do exist, but they're very, very, very rare. And then those people's values would be incompatible with mine. And then I think that in that situation, people like me and you who are pro-social, non-sociopathic people, we win because there's more of us because evolution made there to be more of us. But I just, kind of to summarize all of it, you ask where I get my values from. I am motivated by wins that are beyond my comprehension to, I just do it because I want to, because it feels good. It feels right.
Yeah.
So, and I think that's kind of the only honest answer that I can give, and that's the only honest answer that I think anybody can give of where their values are coming from. Because even if you're theist and you read a passage and you're like, well, that sounds like God couldn't have meant it this way because that would be horrible. God must have meant this. Well, against what are you basing your interpretation on? It can't be the book itself. It has to be your own moral intuition as well. Right.
Yeah, and that's also where it gets back to the difference then between the views is not that both sides are kind of just like doing the intuition. It's at the end of the day, is that intuition true or false?
Okay, yeah. So to bring it full circle, that would be the question that I just think the question is, to me, that question is as meaningless as like saying like, hey, like, is ice cream true or false? It's like, it's just preferences just are. I don't think there's a true or a false. There's a truth value to them. I mean, there's a truth value to them in the sense that they exist, like they're things that we experience. But is like I feel like what you're asking is like, is experience true or false? Because my preferences are my experiences, and that question just doesn't compute with the way that I think.
Me bringing that up wasn't trying to get you to like fully answer it more. It's just me again bringing it back full circle and trying to highlight the difference there. It's like because again, there's like a whole branch of philosophy just about us determining truth values, and that doesn't even deal with like morality and stuff. But then we also, would you want to say that math, does it have truth values?
I think sure, I would say so. Okay. A thing mathematically can be.
Math is like the one thing that's truth values. Everything else doesn't.
Well, I think that things that get at objective reality, like things that get at what can be things that are attitude independent, have truth values. But I think that definitionally morality or preferences, ways we want the world to be, our values, cannot be attitude independent because they themselves are attitudes. Like it is, you know what I'm saying? And here's just to maybe, I'll come with a hypothetical that might illustrate what I'm saying a bit better. Like, let's not even look at humans for a second. Like, let's examine a different evolutionary path that we could have gone down. Because I believe that we have values and things that achieve certain ends. And if once we set that end, then there are objectively better and worse ways that we can get to that end. But that end is set subjectively through emotion, through preferences that are authored by things that are beyond our control. If we think of a species that are not human, species that maybe were born in lava, Like to a human, if you point a flamethrower at somebody and torch them, that's immoral if you hold it there for long enough to kill them. But for like the lava people, that would not be an immoral thing to do because that wouldn't harm them, right? Or, I mean, conceive of a species whose consciousness was uploaded like or synced via some kind of like Bluetooth-esque technology. It was backed up to some server in a cloud somewhere. So at any time you killed one of them, you killed their physical body. Their consciousness just still exists in the cloud, and it's reborn to a new body that next day. Suddenly, murder and killing people wouldn't really be seen as a moral wrong anymore, because you're not actually ending anybody's experience. You're just mildly inconveniencing them because now they have to be reborn into some gooey Matrix-like dystopian test tube the next day. So it's like I'm just saying that, like, given the different parameters that are set by our biology and our species, the things that cause us harm, our preferences, both towards and away from things, and our end goals are going to be different. And then within those parameters that are kind of set by that biology, we're going to have different values, different morals, and different ethical systems. So, like, you can say that for humans, maybe there could conceivably be some optimal moral system that would satisfy like the most people given their ends, but that's just my worldview. I mean, that's given that we all objectively agree, or maybe the term is intersubjectively. I'm not sure if I've been using that wrong this whole time, but just whatever that social contract is, I think that's where it comes from. So, I mean, does that make sense, or like?
Yeah, I literally, like, this is what's like hard for me, because I'm at such a position that I when I get to a lot of these points, what comes down is it's like both sides are doing the same thing. And what seems to differentiate them is very minor. Because, like you said, I think that a lot of what, again, like I was saying how I actually would put in the prudential normative stuff in with a lot, that it would collapse into moral. Wait, I think I might have reversed them. But notice if I'm saying that, then it also is very similar to like your perspective.
Right.
It's the things that separate our two worldviews are smaller than most people would realize, if that makes sense. And so again, like, it's fun to like debate, but I'm also not one of the people, like, in the normal like Christian sense, that thinks like it's necessary to like convince people to my side.
Right.
I actually think like people can serve like a good, or like serve God and not even necessarily like believe in him.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, same. Like, I don't aim to convince anybody of my beliefs on philosophy. My motivation in having these conversations is just for the intellectual fun of it, but also I want to be challenged, and it's like I want to know, like, if there's some kind of hole in my reasoning somewhere, I want it. It's a privilege to be parted with bad or wrong ideas, and so if there's a better way to look at things, I mean, I always want to know what that is. But again, I mean, I've basically in this past hour like laid out pretty much my entire like framework and like my view of morality, and I've just never heard a compelling counter to it, because I just believe that this is the way that it is. And I think that it all just kind of comes back to if-then statements, and if you have a certain end, then there's better and worse ways. But what sets that if? I think that's parameterized by our subjective existence, and whether that's being subjective as a person, or even subjective in the sense of we're even human or even carbon-based. I mean, there's some parameter that is setting that would not be like a universal objective written in the stars right or wrong for certain actions. So I just don't know any other way to describe reality other than that, because I think it's self-evidently true. But I mean, I don't know. I mean,
So,
do you have anything?
not right now, but what I can do, I forgot what the name of the position is that you basically fall into, um, about all moral claims being preferential. Um, if you want to do more of that prodding, I'll probably look up for maybe another video at some time that to maybe look at some of the like counter arguments to that position,
Yeah,
and
sure. I'd
we just
love to
like
hear
talk
them.
through some of those. Um,
Absolutely.
I I might be remembering wrong. I feel like I talked about some of them in a much more informal way already in this, but again, there's probably a better formalization out there that isn't me. I think the other thing that gets complicated too is the level that we're talking about this. While it seems like we've gone real deep, there are versions of your beliefs. There's like other subcategories, and each one of those subcategories have their own little details and their own little counter arguments. Because like the one that I just forgot about that they just came up with is something called like emotivism,
That's
which is
right.
just
Yeah, that sounds familiar.
is a theory that claims that moral language or judgments are neither true or false. They either express our emotions and they try to influence others to agree with us. You are a moral um, anti-realist.
Yeah. I guess a challenge for me might be to come up with a much like a specific grounded ethical framework with like a lot of specific like values and statements or something. But I tend to just operate off of my own like just kind of just like my feelings, man. Just whatever I feel like is right. But I would love to, yeah, if we want to do this again, I'd love to deep dive emotivism maybe. If that's something that we could do at some point, that'd be fun.
Yeah, it starts getting into like all these labels that you have to like start putting on people because you have naturalism, non-naturalism, you got realism about morality, you got anti-realism about morality, um, you have the emotivist, you have the error theorists. It goes on and on and on.
I guess we can do maybe some closing statements real quick, and then I can cut it. We can keep talking for a bit if you want. But I would just say that the last thing I want to say that I think I haven't touched on yet is just kind of the idea that why do we have a drive to come up with objective morality in the first place? Why is that a thing that so many people seem to want? Because it's not just theists. I mean, it's, Sam Harris claims that he has like an objective moral system based on science, which I completely reject. I think he does not succeed at his mission at all. But I think that, I mean, I would agree with most of his moral system. I would just call that the subjective preference stating whatever. But I think that the reason why there is such a push for people for all of time to come up with objective morality is because they think that, I think there's a totally understandable human thought that if I can appeal to something that is outside of me and objective and eternal, that will give me more power, or perhaps more persuasive power, or more of an ability to stop people from doing things that I don't like. I'm going to have more power. Like if I can invoke God, or I can invoke some kind of objective system of ethics, like Sam Harris's thing or Stefan Molyneux's UPB, if I can invoke this, that will make it easier for people to not hurt me, for me to, to put it simply, to stop them from doing things. It's because we want power and influence over other people. And I think that's the framework within which I look at the pursuit of this entire field in the first place, is like, I don't think that they're like, intellectually, I find the concept of objective, of moral realism very unsatisfying. But I think, again, that the drive to do it is because we want to invoke something bigger than us to stop people. And we feel like if we just say, well, because I just feel like it's this way, that's a much weaker argument. And it is. It sounds very weak. And I think, it's not very convincing, but I think it's honest. And I think that that's really kind of all we have. I think any attempt to construct something, to tell them it's not just that I think you're wrong, that I want you to stop, but what you're doing is universally, objectively wrong, and the universe or God wants you to stop, that carries more weight. And that's what I think underpins the entire field, and why scientists, theists, atheists, whoever, everyone's trying to come up with objective morality. And I just don't care to do it. I just don't think it's necessary. I don't think it's possible. And that's my perspective on it.
I get that. I think then I think there are a lot of people though that don't think. Actually, I think there's a lot of people that think the opposite of that, where they hold their moral beliefs and they actually think it will cause more people to commit violence to them, not protect them. And they
that's
still
actually
choose,
a good point. Yeah.
They, especially like minority religions.
Right.
Again, I don't know if that completely undermines what you're going for. If you're just saying that that's like the psychological function from the beginning, but that's not the entire function.
Yeah, there's definitely both forces at play.
Yeah, but it's just something like to think about. I am paying attention. I just, over on my other screen, I have your drive pulled up that you sent me the link, and like, I guess I haven't gone through this in a while, but I have so much drive spam of all this like porn and dating stuff that it's like all these women. It's like, I want to hook up with you. Here's my Google Doc with my link and my phone number. Like, who thinks that that's a real person?
They might be real, Landon. You never know. These could just be crazy bitches who are out for your dick. Okay.
Valeria, cutie. Camilla, cutie.
You could find yourself a nice hot Russian psyop girlfriend.
Dude, this picture is literally just what's her name?
Are you gonna say Mia Malkova?
Yes, it's literally Mia Malkova.
I hate that I knew that.
These are just porn star pictures, not even like normal looking women. Well, Ben, I guess just as my like closing remark, I just think you're definitely wrong, and I am definitely 100% right.
Based and red-pilled, my dude. All right, well, great debate. Thanks for the time, Landon. And
see you, man.
Good friend of the stream, and we'll do it again soon.